That's a
from all that.
Yeah, no, so I've got some cool things here. One of my favorite guys is a guy named Marco from Charbet. I don't know if you've heard of
I've heard the
Charbet.
name. Yeah.
It's Northern California. He's the 16th generation distiller. So, I mean, it goes way back to it's hard to imagine that. But as he puts it, he creates distillate, not staves. And last time I saw him, I asked him for some experimentals. It took him about 6 months. He finally sent it to me, and I'd sat on that for I don't know how long, waiting for the right occasion. And he sent me this enormous box inside of a box, and inside that box was this.
Wow.
And inside this box were his samples.
Yeah.
This is a guy who's serious about
That's
what he
serious
does.
about stuff, yeah.
Yeah, no, so I thought
You
that
got to
this
send the box back.
it's like,
Yeah, maybe we'll refill it.
yeah, that, great minds think
You
alike.
got that out of the garage.
Check this out. It's pretty cool. So here's got 4 samples,
Yeah.
you know, but he didn't want this to break. Not only that, but look, he etched these.
So he's wild.
Is E.H. Taylor Barton's, or is that
That's us.
that's you? But had it always been with that, or was that with the acquisition of Barton's?
No, that was, we bought the Taylor brand. It's probably been 10 years, something like that now. We bought that separate. That was a separate deal.
It's an interesting thing. I remember watching that develop for the longest time. I think sour mash was the first one, but the packaging took so long to come through. It seemed like the whiskey was there, but it's a beautiful package. Always exciting. What would you say is the difference between last year's 4 grain and this year's?
You mean taste-wise?
Yeah.
Well, I think we tried to be consistent, so I think it's pretty consistent. But the one thing, we had 2 different batches of that 4 grain, and so we just released them 2 different times. So they were distilled, cooked separately, and we tried to be consistent. So we think they're pretty, fairly consistent.
When you do antiques, do you try to have the same sense of consistency, or do you let the batches kind of come together in their own personality?
Well, that's the reality. It is what it is. Whatever comes out of those barrels is what we end up with. But the one thing we do try to do, we try to be consistent, but then we also do try to improve every year. I mean, that is always our goal. And there are times when we have to go back to the well and get an older barrel.
I was wondering, how you kind of make an adjustment, because you work on such a broad scale, and I just couldn't imagine putting together such a rich and complex flavor on your first guess with maybe as many as 80 barrels. That's beyond alchemy.
Yeah, usually, I'd say half the time that's the case. That the barrels turn out well.
You're working with good whiskey, so it forms its own character. I guess one of the questions I'd had for that was a rye mash too. The Blantons and Almertili. Why doesn't that have an antique?
It's just the tradition of the recipes that we've used, and we just try to stay consistent. That's really the name of the game across the board. We try to stay consistent, and those are the recipes we've always used. So we've talked a lot about adding to the antique collection, but for now we just don't really have we don't have a driver to do that because we don't have the whiskey for nothing.
Well, in the early years, you started off with the basic 3, and then you added the William LaRue Weller, and then I think the year after that was the Handy, and masterful. Really, I particularly enjoy it. I like all of them, but I prefer cask strength, and the Handy is my iconic rye. Just the richness. That last year's in particular was so bright and really comforting. It varies, but it's fun flavors, and same with the wheat, because it's more specific in styling.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, to me, Buffalo Trace proper is the perfect whiskey. It balances in like very few, if any, in that's sort of my quintessential what bourbon is.
It's kind of what people ask me all the time. What do you usually drink, or what's your favorite? I always say, our Buffalo Trace is designed be our best overall bourbon. You know, when you look at all the factors, you know, supply and age and recipe and taste, and, you know, we try to make Buffalo Trace the best we can make it.
It's just the perfect mash bill with the right age, you know, and it just, there's a quality to it, and then you could play with that a little bit with Eagle Rare or the Stags,
Right.
Stag Juniors, you know, and that would, which to me the Stag Juniors vary the most of any of these, you know, and that just the character of the blends. Some of them have been absolutely outstanding, and others, everyone has different tastes.
Yeah.
So we have four different things here. I guess this first one is listed as lychee, distilled in 2011. Usually I share glasses. Do you mind, or would you rather? Yeah, I figure the alcohol kills the germs anyways.
Yeah.
These are experimental, so there's no listing to what's what. I got a spit for you over there. It works.
So if I had to describe that, you know, right up front, right up front, you get all this aromatic, you know, aroma, very strong, grassy, you know, maybe at the beginning, and then it does have a mild middle and a nice finish, buttery finish at the end. You know, if I had to guess on age, I would say it's not super old. It's not, I don't know how long you had that in the wood.
Probably about 6 years.
6 years.
It was distilled for 6 years ago. He often will age things in a demi-john, so it's in glass. But he describes it as lychee and very much up front are tropical fruit
It
notes
is, yeah.
that lead into a nice counterpart with spice. It's kind of an interesting interplay because most of the time I tend to think of corn leading into rye, and here you've got these tropical fruit notes that lead into different spice qualities.
Really strong up front. That one really strong, and in the middle kind of dips down and finishes buttery and maybe a little, maybe it's more buttery than anything. That's what I get.
Those are rich quality. It's kind of fun. This one is called Spicy Bastard. So I'm not sure where
Must
that
be
goes.
spicy.
Well, we'll see.
Yeah.
If the first descriptor was accurate, that certainly would lead into this possibility.
No mother. No mother.
Oh, well, I was a mother, but not necessarily a
I say no
husband.
mother, right? If it says bastard, right?
Well, it's got to be a mother. That doesn't mean that they were married.
Right. This one does not have that upfront nose like that one. That one's more of an even keel. It doesn't have that lingering buttery finish. It's you know, it reminds me of a kind of a scotch.
Reminds me of a rum. Yeah, but I could see the malt in that too. Combination. But yeah, I could see the malt dominating in that. That makes more sense.
Yeah. Kind
But
of even keel.
I expected it to be more spicy by the descriptor. Instead,
Yeah.
it's a sort of a comfortable realm.
Yeah.
What do we got here? D and T. I have no idea what that means. We'll figure it out.
D&T. That one's not very oily. It's a quick finish. Not a whole lot of flavor. I mean, it's kind of sweet, subdued.
It's bright. Yeah, there's
You know, it's not bad.
almost a sugarcane quality. There's an interesting contrast. I didn't really have any sense of order when I did this because I don't know what the whiskeys are. So I just kind of make it your best guess as you go through that. They do seem to range somewhere, I'd say around 60%.
Could you grab me a large onion?
That's a Pilsner, so we're basically drinking beer.
Yeah. Well, you know, depends on your definition of spice. That last one, you know, it's got all kinds of things going on there.
Yeah,
Very complex, I would use it.
there's a sourness to that that
Yeah, it
really
does
kind
have
of
some
stands out.
sourness. Yeah. You know, if I had to pick my favorite, maybe the second one I'd probably pick over as my
Interesting.
favorite. The first one I thought was okay, but it's too much up front for me. And the third one's just so subdued, you can drink it, you know, I'd be fine.
So oddly, you seem to favor the malt, you know, like in that, you know, which is fun, which lends itself to other possibilities, you know, and that because you're the creative soul. One of my questions was, you know, like odd projects and things like that. You obviously feature bourbon, one of, if not clearly one of the best, if not the best, wheated whiskey. The rye is outstanding as Sazerac, but there's no malt in that. You know, you had an experimental with 6 grain not that long
Yeah.
ago. Is there any possibility of doing a malt?
Yeah, we have malt on the list. You know, we've got a long list of experiments and things that we're going to produce. And malt is definitely on the list. So we're exploring that.
There's great access, and what seems to me that you guys highlight phenomenal grain, and the access to grain is there. Barrel management is generally pristine. I found that there's been some trepidation for the American public to buy malt, barley that is. There's 2 camps. You've got bourbon and you have Scotch, and they rarely coalesce together. But I kind of hope that if Buffalo Trace came out and told people it was okay to drink malted barley, then people would be more willing to take the plunge.
Yeah.
And my goal is to try to invest as many people as possible into the process. So much of this revolves around education and having more tools. Look at the whole list of experimentals. You have a warehouse dedicated to that. You've got, and by the time the things actually form, even in the Buffalo Trace experimentals, there's a lot of research before these things are released.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and so my curiosity is, what are the rejects? You know, the things. Everything starts off as a good idea, but
Yeah. We do that, and you know, we have over 13,000 barrels now of inventory of experiments. Just all kind, anything you can think of, we about have it. And you know, we from time to time, probably once every couple of years, we'll have one that just didn't make the cut. You know, and we call it a failed experiment. We'll take the bottle and we'll bottle it up, put across the side, and we'll say failed, and then we won't sell it, but we keep it, and then we show people why it failed, and we'll say this is bad whiskey. And, you know, we think this is bad, but our thing is, how do you know what bad whiskey tastes like unless you've tasted it? So you have to taste it so you understand it. This is the reason it's bad, you know, and so we don't waste even the failed experiments. We learn something from each one of those.
they say it's not a mistake if you learn from it.
Well, and I've argued that point with Mark is, you know, it was a failed experiment because it didn't make good whiskey. However, the experiment was to explore certain things, and we learned from it. So to me, it was not a failed experiment, but it was failed from a whiskey result, you know, taste-wise. We've done some to intentionally make bad whiskey, so we understand why, you know, how that happens. because we're always trying to apply that to our everyday.
What would you interpret as your greatest surprise, the serendipity of an experimental that really exceeded your expectations?
Well, the 4-grain was probably a perfect example, because that one started out as an experiment. We knew the ratios we wanted to try, and the result is world's best whiskey. You know,
Did you tweak the ratios, or did you pretty much get it right from your first guess?
well, I guess we got it right on the first guess, because we haven't changed it. So, we used the information that we already had because we knew what we're after, but we haven't changed the recipe.
Since you've been so comfortable with that, does that seem like a practical choice as an extension of our brand?
Yes. So based on the results of winning that award, and we internally have been really happy with the result of the aging, because we've been tasting every year as it ages. So we're going to make it every year.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
So on the other side of that is what of your failures surprised you the most that seemed like such a good idea, but
Yeah, we like I say, some of the experiments we've done on purpose to make bad whiskey, and so it really wasn't a surprise. But we did prove some things out, like sour wood, things like that. But we have done some experiments with malt to understand how you can change malt and change the overall flavor of whiskey, and some of those results have been pretty.
it's a tricky thing. Wheat is also really vulnerable. Instead of a wheated bourbon, simply doing wheat as a whiskey, people interpret, because of the great success that Weller and the Van Winkles enjoy, that they interpret that wheat is the grain that all seek, and it's such a small percentage of what's out there in whiskey, and rarely done well. There's a
Right, and we've done some wheat experiments, and we talked about surprises, and we've had some really good results. So there'll be some things that you'll see coming out in the future.
I guess what I sort of track to is being able to realize the celebration of fine distillate with particularly good grain, and being able to bring that forward. It's a lot trickier than it appears to be. Do you take your wood as a given that it's always going to be good, and you just kind of measure?
No,
There,
no, we do a lot of upfront work with wood and grain, and really every single variable. So we isolate all the variables, and we do all the upfront work. We really focus on that, because once it's in the barrel, you have a lot more difficult time of changing it. You can change location, you can change when you dump it, things like that, and how you blend it. But we do all the work up front, and wood is a big one. So we have very tight specifications on what type of wood to use, and then we also age our wood for a minimum of 6 months, outside. And we know, based on our experiments, that it makes a huge difference. It's kind of a roller coaster. 6 months it's certain level, and then 12 months it actually dips, and 24 goes back up. So we think that's really important for the aging. You capture that when you char it after it's been aged out in the yard, and it's an important part of the process for us.
For me personally, I do a lot of single barrels, and so I interpret wood as being key. I don't do it as a foregone conclusion that grain is going to be good. I've had a lot of distillates that weren't. Would you put all three parts, methods of distillation, grain, and wood equal, or would you put wood a little bit ahead?
I've had that question before, so I kind of have a set answer for ratios. I kind of put wood as 50%, because you can do a lot of things up front, and you can destroy it with wood. And the intensity of the flavor from the wood is such a big difference. I mean, we do it all the time. The difference between an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old is almost night and day. So we know that wood is probably the most important variable. But grain selection, yeast, processing, fermentation, cooking, things like that. Distillation is a huge. Equipment that you use is a big difference. You can take one type of still and try to distill it similar to another still, and you're just not going to get it, because it's a different design, the different ratios or reflux and all that. So still design is really critically important. And if you look across the country, we've got thousands, literally thousands of stills now producing product. Every single one of those stills almost are different. I mean, they designed it a little different. They put different kind of reflux or whatever they have on it. Pot stills.
They all have their own personality.
Each one of those stills produces a different product.
I was in Kentucky in January, and I asked Bo, because you had a whole range of stills that were coal-fired, and the environment they basically nixed that. So I was wondering what the difference is between coal-fired and gas-fired on flavor.
Now that would be no difference for us because
It's the same.
Same steam that we're using. We use same pressures and ratios on that, so that would not affect the flavor. But, I guess if you had a direct fired still that produced a certain type of heat, that could make a difference. But most people do not have that, except maybe small stills, out in the country or whatever.
Have you toured Scotland?
I have been to Scotland several times. I haven't been to a whole lot of distilleries, but I've been there, doing promotion work and stuff like that.
For a relatively small space, you've got a great deal of variations in distilleries and terroir styles, and it's a particularly good way to see how little nuances, because eventually stills wear out and they have to be replaced, and if there's a little nick in an arm or different things, that's part of the flavor, and you have to reproduce every facet of that.
We've talked about it at the distillery because we're getting ready to expand the still house, and the question came up, what kind of still are we going to put in? And the answer is exactly like the one that we have. I mean, down with the molds, we're going to put a replica in there, because now the problem we have is our still is the biggest in the industry. It's a 7-foot diameter still, and traditionally, or majority-wise, we're producing maybe 3-foot diameter stills, for most people. So you can't take 2 3-foot stills, or 2 3.5-foot stills and make a 7-foot still. It's just not going to produce the same product. So we have to put another 7-foot still in, and that's what we're going to do.
It's an interesting process. It's the continuation of traditions that have worked for you for such a long time, but the demand and expansion is remarkable. I went through experimental fields. You have an experimental warehouse. The possibilities seem to be beyond description.
Yeah, we're doing a lot of work, and we're continuously building warehouses to age the product. One of the things that kind of makes us a little different than competition is the fact that we age longer than anybody in the industry. So, our standard bourbon is 7-8-year-old bourbon, right? And if you looked at the average, our competitors is probably 4-year-old bourbon for the average. So, what that does to us, though, is it creates a problem with storage. So you have to have double the storage if you have double the age, right? And so we're continuously building warehouses. And people ask me all the time, when are you going to quit? And the answer is, whenever we stop producing more bourbon. I mean, as long as we're producing more, we're going to have to continually build warehouses. There's no end to it. And we have an open-ended PO for building warehouses. There's no end to it.
We was in Kentucky with Bo. After we finished picking, he drove me past the experimental warehouse and all the other warehouses and experimental fields that are going through that. It really, there seems to be no limits to the growth potential in this.
No, and like I say, the bourbon industry in general across the world is strong and it's growing. It's not as big as some people make it out to be. I mean, a 4% growth is really good for the bourbon industry, which is what we're seeing, 4 or 5%. And but some of our brands are beating that 4 or 5%. We like to think that
the biggest limitation is you don't have enough juice to fulfill the demand. Your growth would be significantly better if you didn't do everything right and you waited for the whiskey to be long enough. If you expedited that, took off various age statements, you could sell a lot more whiskey if you make that, but it wouldn't be your whiskey.
That's right.
The two things that you consistently have done is made sure that the whiskey was right, and you didn't raise prices. If there wasn't enough, you just, that's how it is. That level of integrity is extraordinary, especially in this business.
The other thing that sets us apart is the fact that we are always looking at 30 years out, 40 years out. We're focused on keeping customers forever. And we're deadly serious about it, because you're right, the easiest thing for us to do is take Buffalo Trace down to 4-year-old and sell it, and we probably could patch all the holes that we have out there. But,
Sure.
but the problem is, you take that down to a 4-year-old, and now you've got consumers that say, I'm not going to drink that anymore, it doesn't taste the way it used to, or whatever, and we lose a consumer forever. And so we're always focused on, even though, and we told people this ahead of time. If you think back 6-7 years ago, we sent out press releases saying, just letting you guys know, we've only got a certain amount of bourbon and we are going to run out. It is possible. We didn't know for sure, but it is possible when you walk into a liquor store that, our place on the shelf is going to be empty, because we're not going to raise prices and we're not going to change our product. And we told people that up front. We're trying to be honest about it. Of course, we took a lot of grief. A lot of people said to us, we're doing it for a ploy or whatever, but we're just trying to be honest up front. So,
I think it kind of set the standards for others, and raised that. It's an interesting, because so many different parts of this process are both resentful and beholding to what you do, because of the standards that you've set have kept the customer base solid, where others have taken some shortcuts and don't quite understand what appears to be evident, that this is a great way to be able to make short-term money, but
Sure.
that longer view is. It's been my perspective. I've been doing retail for 35 years and working in the industry for 48 years, in this. And this is truly a renaissance. There's never been better qualities of material, better grain, better wood. Methods of distillation are consistent now, whereas in the past, a lot of times working in a distillery, had a lot of people who were pretty much caught into the alcohol part of it, and their distillation was random at best. Now, the distillation is pretty guaranteed if you have good grain, but the wood becomes a bigger factor, because wood is such a unique entity. Each tree, you have your experimentals on upper and lower parts of trees. No two trees are alike, they're fingerprints, and it's always your best guess on that. Then you have different floors in a warehouse, and so many different variables make it serendipitous, but also vulnerable at the same time.
That's right.
So,
We're very fortunate because we have different types of warehouses. Over the years, we've added on to the distillery based on the demand. We needed money to try to factor. But for us, architecture is all different. So we've got metal clad, we've got block, brick, different thicknesses. Each warehouse produces its own whiskey and has a different fingerprint. So for us, it's nice because we have 18 different bourbons. We want that variety so we can mix and blend and do the things that we do. So it's been a blessing.
do you have favorite warehouses for favorite styles?
We do, and we've done a lot of work to identify how each warehouse produces the whiskey. We call it fingerprinting of the warehouses, and we've done a lot of the work. We can actually walk into a warehouse and pick a sample and plug it in and see how it stands in our standards at any point in time. So that's important. It took us about 6 years to get that done, to where we know basically every single barrel where it stands on our standard.
What's your favorite style of warehouse for wheated bourbon?
Well, the best for our wheated bourbon is our block warehouses because it's the most consistent for our humidity and airflow and temperature. And we've kind of narrowed it down to warehouse L is our overall best warehouse for producing wheated bourbon.
Pretty cool. What about rye?
Rye is another one we have proven that a lot of the warehouses that we have with good airflow, the rye tends to produce, come out better on those. The C warehouse is a really good one. Q is a really good one. Those type of warehouses.
Had good success with Q.
Yeah.
And the workhorse, the rye mash one, is there a favorite or is that spread out?
You mean warehouses?
Yeah.
It would be all the rye bourbons, same. So C and barbecue. K is really good. So we basically rate each floor, not just the warehouse, but every single floor has a rating based on what anticipated use.
This is typical to analyze every variable in this process.
Yes, especially for us.
Yeah, no, in the course of it, is this a continual conversation with you and Mark?
A continual conversation, that's right.
Yeah, no, it makes
It's
sense.
a lifetime of work.
Well, it's a dialogue. It's not like one thing. I always maintain everything starts off as a good idea, and you try things and some things work, but it's kind of cool to watch the process evolve and watch the surprises in that. So I guess one of the odd contrasts, what would you say is the difference in your sense of style between, say, Blanton's versus Eagle Rare?
With Blanton's, every brand that we have kind of has a fingerprint or a story or history. And with Blanton's, it started out in '84. They didn't really know what they were doing, right? I mean, they were picking barrels because they liked the taste. And they launched it knowing that people had no idea what single barrel bourbon was. $25 a bottle. Who the hell's going to pay $25 for a bottle?
Back then? Yeah.
Nobody. And so they launched it on faith that they know that it was good whiskey. And so we really haven't changed the process. The nice thing is we pull those barrels out of warehouse each. And Blanton's is only about a 6-year-old bourbon. But in our metal-clad warehouse, it's about right for a 6-year-old bourbon. It just ages, it just works out to where 6-year-old bourbon for warehouse age is a good spot. So, we're real happy with that process, and we haven't changed it. And of course, we haven't changed the package much. Did a little tweaking on corks and things like that. The overall package hasn't changed. It's still relevant. Doesn't need updating. And it's kind of iconic, we think. And we think it started the revolution of people understanding good, high-quality whiskey.
Wasn't the first consistent single barrel that was released in the market?
It was the first period.
Yeah.
That was released
So,
in the market.
In that respect, it set a standard that others really hadn't done, into the process. Had an old friend, Joe Congiusti, who was a particularly good friend, I guess, of the process, and yourself and Elmer, going through that, and he used to tell tales about his barrel picks and how much he enjoyed it. I always maintained he was one of the early leaders in this process, but an incredibly generous soul. But his perspective and community sharing just stood out in that, and it's interesting now that the Mash 2's got such a huge following. I'm not sure, sometimes trying to debate whether it's the flavor or the rarity that drives this process.
Well, the flavor, it's a traditional flavor that we've had. We've been, making that for, since Prohibition. We've made that. That was our main recipe forever.
Was it?
And that for us was a true legacy recipe. And we know that it's good. It has the right amount of rye in it to give it that spice. And we distill it kind of middle of the road, so we know that we're not distilling it too thin or too heavy. So we're real happy with that recipe. Obviously, it's done well with Blanton's, Elmer, some of those brands.
Is there a possibility of extending that product line?
I mean, it's always possible. I never say never. I mean, we've got, like I said, a long list of things that we're working on, and I do tell people all the time, we always have something in the hopper. So don't ever, forget about us, because we're going to come back to you someday and say, we got a new product we'd like you to try. So it's possible. Everything's possible.
Anybody that knows me to lobby for all sorts of different possibilities. And it strikes me by that popularity that it makes sense to do both a younger variation of that and an older one in the form of an antique, because it just intrigues the public so much. I'm the last bastion before the public, and I see their demands. And it's fascinating to watch a whiskey that was once $25 go through multiples of that now, and there simply isn't enough to be able to meet that demand regardless of the price. It's extraordinary, and yet welcoming too, to be able to have such a following for the art that you create, in that this really transcends. Even as an odd side note, your Wheatley vodka, something that is generally thrown off as basically alcohol. It's a very well-made distillate. It's creamy, it's rich, it's extremely fairly priced. That's not easy to do. As a naked spirit without any wood, if you didn't do it right, it would show.
That's right.
Yeah.
And, we apply the same type of passion that we have with bourbons and whiskeys to all of our products. And we did not cut the vodka short. So we tried to make a good craft style vodka, reasonably priced, like you said, and something a little different, 10 times distilled, 82 proof.
Where did Clicks come from?
Clicks was a kind of an evolution of a project because we never intended to sell it. We actually bought that micro still that we have, and we bought it in, it seemed like 2005. I think we put it in 07. And when we put it in, I said we need to make some vodka just to see if we can do it. And we basically dedicated time to it, and it was like fun time. And we didn't have to worry about production because it's separate. It's kind of a new toy we had. And so we took 4 months, and we took, I think it was 26,000 gallons of beer, and ended up with 240 gallons of vodka. It took us 4 months to do it. I don't even know what it cost. We didn't add it up. And we probably lost money on the deal, but it is $300 a bottle. But anyway, we had this 240 gallons, and they said, well, we might as well sell it. What are we going to call it? And what we did, we took all the batches, we redistilled them, and added all that up, and it was 159 times total distillations to make 240 gallons of product. And so they come up with those Roman numerals, clicks, just because of that. It had nothing to do with me. It was a marketing.
Well, the name of it had nothing to do with you, but the process itself was almost entertaining to see.
Yeah.
It's the world of what if that you live so closely in.
Well, the idea was to make a vodka that was absolutely really good, right? And it didn't matter how long we're going to take to do it. And we just learned a lot from the process about cutting and taking heads and tails and doing things. Ended up, the vodka is really, really good. So,
It seems ironic that you create a vodka that was more pricey than the finest whiskeys that have been made.
yeah, but if you think about what all it went into making the product, to me, it's worth it. But, to a consumer, obviously not everybody's going to pay $300 for a bottle. There are people that do it. We sell it pretty regularly.
What do you like to drink outside of whiskey?
I like trying things. I don't mind, trying things, but, I do tell people I don't have a lot of time, so I don't get to do that very much. But, there's good scotches out there. Vodkas are good. I like trying them just because we make a lot of vodka. Rums are becoming something new that, I'm trying them. I haven't found any that I love yet. So I don't mind trying. I don't taste a lot of tequila. I could.
You've got an exciting program though with the Corazon Boomerang coming across. I sent my first barrel last year of Eagle Rare's real spicy one to Mexico. I think they FedExed it. They were so excited about the process.
Yeah.
It's going to be in Añejo. It won't be available till spring next year. But a couple people from Sazerac, they're tasting it last summer, and they think that barrel is one of their favorites. So I'm kind of excited about that. I had a really sweet Weller that I sent to Mexico to make an reposado. That's supposed to be bottled at the end of April.
Yeah.
So I'm excited about translating that really good wood management into a spirit. I think that tequila shows terroir especially well. And the people I've met from the Mexico side of Corazon are really extraordinarily enthusiastic and skilled. It's a project that I think dovetails very nicely into what you do.
And again, same passion that we have for all of our other projects, we apply that to that tequila project.
I'd love to see that format into rum, and to that point, because rum has got, it's the closest nexus that I found from bourbon. More and more people are seeking that. And if you can control wood management into quality rum, the possibilities are exciting. A lot of rum is, how would I put it? I describe it as the difference between a kitchen and a laboratory. And a good part of them seem synthetic, more so than really warm and flavorful.
Well, we're working on rums. We're looking at rums, and like you say, wood management is probably the biggest part of it, and we feel the same way. And the possibilities are endless. Really, any product that you pick, but rum is one that really people haven't explored it quite as we think as much as you could.
It's the closest connection I have to the bourbon market. People have different issues with, say, tequila or with scotches and others. You could do Irish whiskey because it's a corn base, and so that has some connections. But rum makes the most sense because most people involved in bourbon love the corn element of it. So you want to keep that aspect, the sweetness in the forefront, at least to be able to gateway people from one flavor to another. I think that the more educated the public is, the greater the possibilities of expanding.
No doubt, and we've been doing that for a long time. Trying to educate the public and traveling around, talking about it's kind of like the medicine man or whatever, going around telling people about bourbon for sure. And then, like you say, we're just getting started on a lot of these other projects, and that's a big part of it. We've done a lot of work up front to get more people involved on educating as well. So we probably got 100 people across the country now. That's our whole job is to educate the public and tell them about bourbon, our products and things.
We'll reiterate that I think that you have some of the best people in the business that I've enjoyed as both professionals as well as friends, and it's fairly consistent throughout the whole process that everybody that represents this does it with a level of pride and knowledge. Most people sell this stuff as widgets. If they weren't doing this, maybe they'd be selling washing machines.
I think if you walk through the distillery, which you have, and you interviewed all 460 employees, the one common thing that you would get is pride. They're all there. Their main driver is the pride of the fact that they're producing this product for, entertainment value for other people. And they're very proud of it. So.
Fundamental difference between, as I put it, art versus alcohol, where alcohol is a legal sanctioned drug that's available for the general public. But when you're selling fine spirit, what I see here in particular is a good 15% of my business is out of state. People will travel to shop and to enjoy the opportunity to exploit new flavors and learn, but they also bring their family and their friends here. What other form of retail would you have somebody bring their father, their wife, their children to be able to expand on this connection? It's such a personal connection that you don't see. I don't know, but I don't see that in any other form of art that brings people together. It's really a celebration of the community that we live in.
Yeah, it's different. And I think, we talk about it all the time that, you do have to respect it. It's a respect for the industry and what we're trying to get accomplished. We're not selling milk and cookies. It's, like you say, it's a regulated product that we take very serious. But at the same time, you're trying to, produce a good, high quality, crafted product for people. So we appreciate that.
But it connects some people on such a personal level. There are times when you'll create something that you can't wait to show it off to somebody that's in your own office, friends, family. Mark, look what happened.
Yep.
You give it your best effort, but sometimes it exceeds your expectation, and you go, "Wow, this just takes your breath away."
Yeah.
It's really rewarding.
Yeah, we had one the other day. We tasted it. It was about I think it's about 13 years old now, and we shared it, and everybody seemed to like it. Pretty excited about it. So yeah, some good stuff coming.
I like to cook, and when everyone finishes the meal, you know that you did a good job.
That's right.
You've raised a great deal of possibilities, and you've filled in a lot of gaps in my understanding of why things are done the way they are and what more is possible.
Yeah. Tons of possibilities.
I'm really grateful for that, and I was surprised that I was able to exceed my basic questions in a format. The conversation was just really scintillating and very rewarding.
We can talk whiskey all day.
Sure enough. Yeah, no, I'm going to Scotland next month, as a matter of fact, working on a special project with a large company trying to create a would say, whiskey in my image, as it were. I love young distillate, and it's my ultimate goal to be able to showcase a fine distillate with enough wood to mellow it, but still highlight the grain.
Yeah.
And it's one of those odd parts. I guess it's my wine background, but I'm very careful around tannins, and overaging whiskey is something that drives me crazy.
Tricky thing.
Well,
Depends on the barrels.
well, the funny thing is, you go to these shows and you get people who will tell you that they want the 30-year-old, or 12 or 15, whatever it is, and often they're bad, and they'll interpret that they must be great because they're expensive. People are interpreting flawed whiskeys as superior because the price tag is such, and they reconfigure their palate. They'll think that something that's bitter and sour must be good because it's got a couple of extra zeros on it. And if you just tried it by itself, you wouldn't like it. But now they grow to seek that. And that's part of what I try to do, is to invest people. Here, try this, but I won't tell you what it is. I'll let you figure it out for yourself. But what's the age of this? What's the mash bill? It's like, just tell me if you like it. You know, that's all that really matters. But people have a quest for facts that are they supersede flavor, and that's kind of backwards.
It is backwards, yeah. I think a lot of the pricing that's out there, it's tough. It depends on the company too. I think when you look at a distillery, you also have to look at the company and who's running it. Unfortunately, that's hard to get. You know, it's hard to get that information. You know, the philosophies of that particular distillery, you know, what they think about pricing and what it should be.
They take something like Four Roses. There's a company that showcases 2 mash bills and 5 yeast grains, so you have 10 whiskeys in the same bottle. And last year, I picked out 4 barrels of Four Roses, and at the end, Al Young asked me if I wanted to see what I picked. And it's like, oh, okay. It hadn't even occurred to me. So he showed it to me, and they all had the yeast as V. And he asked me if I wanted to change my mind, or change my picks. It's like, well, why would I do that? I pick the best flavors because everybody picks by recipe. It's like, well, isn't that kind of backwards? You know, but that's the mindset behind this is people interpret information. I think that they're intimidated by flavor. They're afraid to be wrong. And it's as simple as just tasting good. It's food.
Yeah, that's right. No doubt.
I don't know. So what did you do before you were a distiller with Buffalo Trace?
Well, I was pretty much started right out of college. I had a job. I was working in polymers and things like that while I was in school.
So you're a chemist?
A chemist, a chemical engineer. And, so, it was a good background for what I was getting into. What really attracted me to the distillery, though, was the history. I had a decision to make out of college. Work for a modern facility, work for a facility that's been there for, at the time, since 1773. And my pick was, I want the history, because my theory was this place has a lot of potential, which it did, and obviously proving that out. But it also is not going anywhere. We're not just going to bulldoze this place. It's been here for a long time. So, that's really what drove me to the thing. And I didn't want to, I want to stay in Kentucky. Close to family, those kind of things.
Had you had much experience with whiskey outside
not
of just college drinking and all that?
Consumers. But we have to learn that on the job. It's just the way. I worked under the distiller before me for 10 years, and then he retired and I took over. It just took a lot of on the job questions. I was lucky enough to have Elmer and Gary Gayhart. T. Lee, and together you're talking about 60 plus years of experience at the time when I started. And, when Elmer was there till he was 94, I think, 93, and Gary stayed for 36 years. And our warehouse manager is still there. He's been there since 1964. Our still operator has been running the still since 1963, still. And, I'm just blessed to have all that experience around. So to this day, I still do it. I bombard him with questions, and I still call Gary. He's retired, but I still call him. I think he likes getting calls.
But it's still kind of his baby. It's the part that I maintain is the hardest part, but the most valuable is caring. You know, it's not a job; it's a
No,
life.
no, that's
You know, and when you make that connection, you know, and that's what you're talking about for the pride of all the people that are working there. Is they're not just working for a paycheck; they have a real sense of honor, a badge of accomplishment that
Right.
they're making something that is extraordinary.
We've got a long history. And like I said, it's really what sets us apart from competition is our history and legacy of the things we've been doing for 240 years.
So like when I went there, I swear I told you it was Bo's place. His great grandfather was E.H. Taylor.
Yeah.
I think you said the first Taylor was there in 1760. You know, so that boggles my mind. He's like a traveling antiques roadshow.
Did you get to see the
Pompeii.
Pompeii?
Yeah, no, cool. I mean, like you're talking about bulldozing, got underneath each layer, and look at the old Taylor Distillery. It's amazing, you know, like element of just the scale of the way that things were done before that.
Right.
It's really an archaeological dig.
Big deal back then. I mean, back then that was probably huge. You know. For us, you know, I look at it and think, you know, no wonder they expanded because you know you can only make so much of those fermenters. So what we're in the middle of now is we're putting one of those fermenters back into service, and so we're putting copper lining, and we're going to actually ferment in one of those old fermenters. And we're using the original Old Taylor recipe, and we're using our patent pending fermentation process, and we're going to reproduce that and put it in barrels.
It's pretty cool. That's amazing. Those are huge.
Well,
Yeah, no, you're talking about the scales of things, you know, in the course of that whole place is pretty amazing. It's hard for me to get my arms around that consciousness, but that's such a cool concept, you know, and just as the process moves forward, so much of it is looking back respectfully to what's already been done.
Yeah.
So you kind of have the best of both worlds. It's history that teaches you the best lessons of the future.
yeah, if you think about what we did, we basically dug these fermenters up out of the ground from history, and now we're putting them back into service.
Yeah,
Something
you know,
to say.
in a way that will both be a marketing value, but I mean, ultimately, these things evolved in a specific style for what already worked. You know, who knows what steps it took to get to that point, but it's intriguing. Still, do you think in a year or so you'll be able to start producing?
I think it'll take about, we think it's about 18 weeks for the copper to get there from the copper mine in Germany. And after that, it'll probably take, I think about 8 months. You know, we should be ready to ferment, put it in barrels.
So let's see, how long? Well, just to that. So
Maybe before the end of the year, maybe.
within that scope, though, what do you think in terms of producing actual whiskey that's drinkable? That you'd be 6 years or longer?
Well, you know, we get that question a lot, but you know, it just depends on
how it evolves.
You know,
with the
6
flavor.
years is right because Taylor was traditionally always a 6-year product. So I would say 6 years minimum.
That's kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah.
But you know, like to your point, is you let the whiskey tell you when
we'll
it's
just
ready.
let it
You know,
speak
in
its
the
story,
course of-
right?
Yeah, no, taste. The odd part is people make fun of it, but research is a very real part of this process,
Yeah.
and you know, it's the part that you can't replace a person with a computer. You have to taste, and no machine can do that with the sensibilities. You might be able to play chess, but you can't taste.
They still have to tell the story.
It's fun. I can't thank you enough for taking the time and
Good.
agreeing to go through all these questions. Hopefully, I didn't seem to meander into too many nonsensicals and things in that. But
Say we can talk whiskey all day.
I've never done this before, you know, in this, but it struck me as such a neat opportunity. Marco is a great friend, and the opportunity to celebrate his distillates, because they've been sitting there unknown for me, waiting for a special occasion, and your visit here was something that I've looked forward to for some time, just because you hold the answers to so many questions that really matter to me on a personal and a professional level.
We really appreciate the business. I mean, it's important.
Well, you know, it's kind of an odd thing, but I take a real level of pride, and particularly I collect thank you notes from Mark Brown, because they're not something that's given free. And it's my badge of honor in this process. But to be able to represent Buffalo Trace with some level of integrity is a great deal of pride that I put forth. And Buffalo Trace rewards me in so many different ways that it's a better store. If you look through here, everything around you, if you look behind you up on top of the coolers, there's pretty much this is a Buffalo Trace store.
That's right.
You know, and that it's not by coincidence. You know, and that. So I'm pleased to be able to do this and continue. You know, Bo has talked me into the occasional visit of Kentucky, something I prefer not to travel often, but I find myself getting out there more often. So maybe next year on a visit, we could do that. And on the odd occasions you come to Chicago, I'd particularly like to be able to show you flavors that you're less exposed to.
Definitely.
Because my goal is to be able to bring your mouth to places it's never been to before. It helps you to understand odd parts, Amaris, vermouth, bitters, places that are kind of odd, that don't necessarily make sense. Wine-based things that like you've heard of and you've used as part of a cocktail, but you've never really had by themselves. Right. I find that fascinating, and continue to enjoy surprises.
It's endless. I mean, it's it literally is endless.
And so much of this stuff has been out there for hundreds of years, and it's like, how come I didn't know about it? And it's right there. Because there is almost an infinite amount of things out there to grasp. Cool. Well, again, thank you so much. I've got so much on my mind right now. It's amazing.